Welcome to Focus 54, your real feel of African news. My name is Jeffrey Mrimbechi, and we are hosting this show with a main focus on the South African election. For the first time, we are seeing, for the first time since 1994, we're seeing the formation of for coalition government, thanks in the main to a lot of players that are coming up in the South African election. The results show that there is no one majority, and the ANC, for the first time since 1994, has had and constitutionally now needs other players to be a part of this. Later on, we'll be discussing what this means for South Africa, for the regional bloc, especially as SADC will be coming together. Speaking of the SADC summit, proudly behind me, as we had last week, the Minister of Transport and Infrastructure Development in the Zimbabwean government, Honorable Felix Mona, talking about some of the roads that we are having in Zimbabwe. And this is one of the roads, Leopold Chakawira Avenue, one of the marvels. And you can clearly see from behind me and in front of me that the traffic is flowing freely. But let's also add a little bit of a twist to this and get straight into our news and find out what's happening in the continent of Africa. Now, here's what is happening now in Nairobi. Nairobi hosted the annual general meeting of the Africa Development Bank, the AFDB, and some very critical issues have been mentioned in this entire process. The reform of international financial architecture is on top of the agenda and was discussed. Yes, be careful. You cannot have reforms without taking into account climate challenges which have affected Africa. A huge agro-economy with a very young population, arguably from all continents, the continent with the highest number of active youths in the world. Africa needs $213 billion per year until 2030 for sustainable development. So how can we meet these challenges? Now, the AFDB has defined their strategy for the next decade, for the next 10 years, and for this, capital increased from $201 billion to $318 billion, an increase necessary to maintain the AAA rating of the institution and keep borrowing on the financial markets at low rates. Now, the people of Malawi have plunged into mourning. Quite next to home in Zimbabwe, they have plunged into mourning following the death of the country's Vice President, Salus Chilima. Now, he, together with 9 others, died in a plane crash in a forest north of the country, and they were due to attend a funeral. And I do quote verbatim, "In every nation, we always have leaders that like parents. Not one person, but many people. This is so sad." And this is coming from the words of a Lilongwe resident, Rose Abigail Mwinjilo. President Lazarus Chakwera already announced 21 days of mourning, of national mourning this week, with the wreckage of the small plane carrying Chilima, and a former First Lady was discovered in the mountainous area of the country's north. Flags will be at half-mast across the entire country, and as an African, and the 54 countries of Africa are mourning with the people of Malawi. We move further north, where we have some positive financial news as Egypt's economy is stabilizing. 2024 has been good for Egypt, with interest rates stabilizing. Now, this is reports coming through from the year 2024, where the central bank announcing that interest rates are now at 27.75%, following consecutive hikes totaling 800 basis points. Now, inflation fell to 28.1% in May, down from 32.5% in April. And this stabilization follows reforms and government's decision to liberalize Egypt's pound exchange rate on the 23rd of May. As promised, we will be talking about what's happening within the SADC region. I did say that this is the election year for Africa. Very important election. Southern Africa South Africa being the biggest industrialized country within the continent, what does this mean for Zimbabwe? What does this mean for the SADC bloc? And what does this mean for the entire continent? I sit down with two marvelous experts, an expert in international relations, as well as an expert in terms of media and politics within the African context, and we find out what's happening in Africa. Welcome to the second edition of Focus 54. We are dissecting the post-mortem of the South African election, and as you know by now, the South African election was concluded and spread largely between its political parties, the ANC, the DA, the MK party and the EFF. And South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has said that the conduct and results of the polls were a reflection of the democracy in the country, which he says is very strong. And I am joined in studio, as promised, by two experts and two fundis within the scope of what we want to discuss. Mr. Visitor Manjonjo, an international relations expert, as well as one of our own within the media, Elton Ziki, a media and political analyst. Gentlemen, welcome, and quite an interesting election, if I must say.
It has been quite a sobering one, if I may say as well, because looking at the record of the ANC from its inception coming into democracy to win the desires of the South African people in 1994, you'd want to see that South Africa then from that onset had an absolute majority in parliament, which is the National Assembly. And in 2024, there's been an upset as a result of quite multidimensional factors that have caused the disruption in the hold of power by the ANC, hence the outcome of this election and the way it has been spread in terms of the lack of a majority in the National Assembly. But to that effect, we would also want to pay attention to the fact that this outcome requires a serious self-introspection with the hope for remedial action by the Liberation Movement, ANC, to garner support of the disgruntled, the disenfranchised, and those that feel excluded from the whole issue of governance in South Africa.
And this is not the first time that we're seeing a coalition government set up within South Africa. The first one was in 1994 under then President Nelson Mandela, and the dynamics were a lot different. In terms of international relations, how do they balance this out now with different views as opposed to the traditional ANC views that were there in the government? How will they balance out with the in hindsight of the things that the South African government has its hands on? First of all, you've got the issue of the Israel-Gaza situation. You also have the issue of BRICS and its very radical views. How do they balance this out?
Jake, Jeff, when we look at that phenomenon, it's going to be the most difficult part, especially for the ANC to balance if they're either to go into a coalition or if they're either going to go into a GNU, because they are going to join more parties with different ideologies and different foreign policy. For example, you mentioned the issue of the DA and the ANC. The DA is kind of pro-capitalist in nature and in their foreign policy, and the ANC is kind of socialist in their foreign policy. So the balance between those two will be very difficult. So I think it will be to the advantage of the ANC if they are to put people either from EFF or from the MK in those critical ministries like the Minister of Foreign Affairs, so that they are able to balance their foreign policies because they share an almost common ideology with those other parties, say for the DA.
Well, Elton, surely there should come some benefits of having a coalition government. It can't always be bad. Looking at South Africa, some of the key issues that we've faced in South Africa, issues of violence, which is rampant. They are scoring highly in the world in terms of corruption and other issues that have been raised within their public media, to the point whereby just before election, the Speaker of Parliament had to step down. Does coalition come with certain benefits?
Characteristically and inherently, coalitions are a depiction of stability, of instability. Stability lacks in a coalition because of the divergent views, as alluded to by my co-panelist in this presentation. But of course, we wouldn't want to undermine the potential benefits that would exist, because this is a platform where divergent political parties with different philosophies and ideologies will have a chance to come together, will have a chance to reach out to one another and create a platform for cohesion, for understanding, for compromise. Because as it is, a coalition government, an inclusive government, we've seen it from the experiences of our own in Zimbabwe, that it's a coalition of convenience or inconveniences. There are compromises that come with forming a government of national unity. And the benefits, as I've said, one, you are at arm's length with your rivals, so you have the opportunity to find each other. And this is also an opportunity to galvanize the nation towards common good and cause. And it is our hope, as a panelist, in looking at it from a perspective that you would say it's not only the ANC that you'd be looking at, but you are looking at the whole of Southern Africa in terms of revolutionary and liberation movements, to say what is their approach to the concessions that they will then give out to their former erstwhile oppressors in the time of apartheid, coming back under the guise of the Democratic Alliance, the DA, to say vis-a-vis the interests of the DA, which is white monopoly capital, which this term is not allowed, is not preferable in South Africa in terms of saying and identifying white interests as white monopoly capital. And these are very clear-cut positions that have been put forward by the DA in terms of their international outlook, in terms of their foreign policy, in terms of saying what is it that we want for the majority of the people in South Africa. They're against expropriation of land.
So what you are giving us is I would say the sentiments and the situational analysis of what's going on within South Africa. But South Africa, the record is on in terms of the SADC region, where Zimbabwe is hosting the SADC summit in August. But every national outside South Africa has faced some sort of xenophobic attacks, high crime rates that are public record. In terms of a coalition government that is being formed, would this not be opportune time for the other parties that will now have a voice to reach out to international partners to say South Africa might be changing, or South Africa is not what it seems to be in the negative?
It's an opportunity for the South African government, since it's going to be all-inclusive, for them to buy in from the idea of the ANC to say, we are in the SADC region and we don't need to hate each other like what has been going on. But the difference now is that, like I've mentioned before, our foreign policies could be different depending on who takes what in the GNU. So I think it's an opportunity for them, but it will take time, and probably it's a process. It may not start as good as we may wish or assume, but it's a process which you need time. I don't know, maybe my brother may have something to say on that.
I think what is essential is to appreciate the underlying currents or information regards the treatment of fellow African citizens or nationals within the geographic borders of South Africa. What we must understand is, as I've highlighted earlier on, is that it's not being xenophobic. The South Africans largely dislike, for a lack of a better word or a better term, I want to desist from using the word hate, because that is what we are going to fight the issues of self-hate. South Africans do dislike other fellow African nationals. They don't regard anyone in the DA or anyone with Caucasian skin to be a foreigner. But they'll regard a Mozambican, a Zimbabwean, a Zambian, a Malawian to be a foreigner in South Africa. And they meet injustice against the souls and lives of those nationals. But what is also key is that we must understand that this is a result of the effects of apartheid in that segregatory approach by...
So what I will do, and cut you short, is we need to digest and ponder on this point, because we are now going to get into the different ideologies and also touch down on what happens internationally as we get into the third and final segment of Focus 54. Clearly, it has heated up different views about what the coalition government of South Africa might look like and what it means. This is Focus 54. Stay tuned for the third and final segment. Welcome to the third and final segment of Focus 54, and we are breaking down the post-mortem of the South African election. And one of our panelists, Mr. Elton Ziki, who is a media and political analyst, has some very strong views. You were saying that the toxic, that is a better word, the toxic traits of what apartheid is are now manifesting in the ideology and the mentality of some South Africans, not all South Africans. And it has a negative impact on other foreign nationals such as Malawians, Zimbabweans, Mozambicans, the Congolese, Nigerians, and many others. Now with the coalition government, still on that point, what different ideologies are they bringing out? The DA, for lack of a better word, has a different agenda towards the EFF, the MK. Will these divergent ideologies then bring positivity into the government?
Thank you for that layout in terms of the requirements of what you are presenting. I would want to allude to a fact that you presented earlier on in the previous segment, to say that the issues bedeviling South Africa, if I may rephrase in the way that I understood, the different ideologies that are presented by the political parties in South Africa are known. And each party has its own position. But this difference, as I said earlier on, in terms of the requirement to see that which party has the interests of the people of South Africa at heart, is what is key. But we have always gone around the issue of saying in Africa, we believe in that cohesion, in that unity as nations and member states. That is why we've also segmented ourselves from a regional perspective to say we are SADC, we are East Africa, we are West ECOWAS, and all those regional groupings. We identify with each other. But ultimately what defines the individual states is the characteristics of their political landscape. And for South Africa, this is a defining time in history. 30 years since the NC had the absolute majority, and now that has been challenged. It will also present different scenarios that may not have been anticipated by the ANC. But also this is a chance to regroup, regenerate, and rejuvenate the ANC in terms of its vision. To say if it is populist, it must also decide if it is going to dine or usurp on the devil's table, if I may say, because if the DA is to come and is against the socialist approach of the ANC or the issue of wealth sharing, the equitable distribution of wealth based on regardless, which does not look at race, because if you look at the statistics of the white population in South Africa versus the 62 million people population of South Africa, you'll see that they are very marginal in terms of the numbers.
So while you mentioned that, the ANC did mention that current President Cyril Ramaphosa will run for his last term, even under these circumstances. BBC journalist Lanai Netsa Kupemba said that one of Africa's oldest revolutionary movements is in trouble. That's one of the sentiments that she wrote. Internationally, is it a very good, is this a good decision for the ANC to run with Cyril Ramaphosa, seeing the engagements, heavy engagements he's had in the last 24 months, familiarity with presidents? He was even at the King's inauguration and many of those things. Is he the right man to say, despite the circumstances at home, he is the flag bearer of the country as they go internationally?
Cyril Ramaphosa is already run for the presidency of South Africa and being the president of ANC already, and he's the main. But I've seen other parties, they are throwing other suggestions that if they're going to go into a coalition, they may need him, or some they're saying they don't even need him. But I think in South Africa, there's something that we need to look at since their independence in 1994. South Africa has not maintained a president who has finished his term, save for President Mandela. Thabo Mbeki was replaced by he was replaced 9 months before the next election. President Zuma was also replaced by Cyril Ramaphosa.
And then incarcerated post-presidency.
Yes. So it's the culture in South Africa that a president doesn't finish his second term. So I think for President Cyril Ramaphosa, he has a lot that he needs to work on within his party, because the problem with South Africa is not from outside, because a ship doesn't sink from the waters which are within, from the waters which are outside. It sinks because of the waters which are within it. So the problem with the ANC is not anyone who is outside it. The problem is within. That's why we see people, influential people who were within it. The likes of Julius Malema was outside and he went with a chunk. And we talk of President Zuma, he was inside, he went with a chunk. So the first thing that President Cyril Ramaphosa needs to deal with is try to consolidate power within ANC itself for it to be stable. Then they deal with everything else after they deal with that.
Now, gentlemen, in our conclusive arguments, I know that this issue is something we can talk about in at least 10 chapters of different books. But as we conclude, Zimbabwe will be hosting the SADC summit in August. There are various issues, especially free trade agreements, free movements of human beings, trade, and all sorts of things. If you were to give advice to the South African government, what do you think they should do in terms of public relations, international relations, diplomacy, as they meet with the SADC bloc in August?
I think for the ANC, I think they must consider issues related with self-introspection and creating institutions that border on the dissection of ideas and philosophies to create homegrown solutions that present a platform to unify Africans. And as we are all aware, no one ignores the fact that South Africa is a regional economic powerhouse. It's an international force on the global stage to reckon with, and it is of repute. So largely Africans would look at would look up to South Africa to create some form of order and semblance within its internal political institutions.
Do you agree, and what do you think the South Africans should say, and what do you think South Africa should say as they come through to Zimbabwe in August?
Like what my brother has alluded, within the region, the SADC region, South Africa is a powerhouse economically. So the strength of South Africa determines the strength of the bloc somehow. So we pray that they solve their problems within South Africa, they build their government to be stable enough so that we are able to be able to trade as we have been used to be doing in the past. So the strength and the stability of South Africa determines how the stability of the region.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. We would have gone to, I would say, around the globe speaking about the impact of the South African election. And this is a bit of a post-mortem leading up to the SADC summit, which Zimbabwe will be hosting. For Focus 54, I am Jeffrey Murembechi. Please give us your thoughts and your comments on our YouTube channel, which is ZBC TV online, as well as our Facebook page, where we'll also be giving you a repeat of this. And these fine gentlemen have broken down different sectors of the South African election, and we'll be keeping an eye on how South Africa will develop politically as we lead up to the SADC summit and beyond. For Focus 54, it's goodbye for now.